Think about purple. Not just, any purple, but what it meant in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Wearing it back in the Iron Age Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't just picking a color. It was a statement. Power. Prestige.
Absolutely. A big deal. And it wasn't just a quick fad either. This color had serious symbolic weight for, well, centuries.
Right. And you have to wonder, with it being so popular, how did they actually make all that purple dye?
Exactly. We've seen hints, archaeological clues suggesting this big demand across the Mediterranean. There had to be a significant industry.
But finding the actual, factories, the big production sites.
That's been the tricky part. A real puzzle, honestly. Where were they doing this on a large scale?
Oh, get ready, because I think a major piece of that puzzle might have just clicked into place.
Oh.
Today we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating discovery over in modern-day Israel. It's shaking things up. Looks like a major Iron Age purple dye production facility.
Ah, yes. Tel Shiqmona. That's the site. It used to be a fishing village right on Israel's Carmel coast. And it's given us what researchers are saying is the first really clear evidence of purple dye manufacturing happening on, well, an industrial scale. Consistently. In one dedicated place.
Not just a small workshop somewhere.
No. And we're talking sustained production. This seems to have been going on for about half a millennium. Think roughly 1100 down to 600 BCE.
Half a millennium.
Yep.
Wow. That's a serious commitment to a color. Before this, like you said, we had clues, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some stained pottery shards, guesswork, based on how much purple fabric turns up.
Exactly, inferences.
But this find at Tel Shiqmona, and this is coming from a study in PLOS 1, right, by a whole team.
That's the one. Anthropologists, archaeologists, historical specialists, the works.
It sounds like they've found the actual factory floor, so to speak. The real setup for long-term significant production. First time seeing it this clearly.
It really is a bit of a game changer in that way. The research hammers home that this was a dedicated space, consistently churning out this super valuable dye over this huge stretch of time.
Not just a few traces here and there.
Not at all. It's a whole collection of artifacts found together in context. Everything points to a continuous, substantial manufacturing operation.
Okay, so for everyone listening, our mission here today is to really unpack this. What does Tel Shiqmona tell us? How big was this? How they keep it running for 500 years?
And what does it reveal about this incredibly prized stuff, this Tyrian purple everyone wanted?
Exactly. It's way more than just a pretty color, isn't it? It feels like it unlocks a whole new layer of understanding about ancient life. For you, listen.
Absolutely. And the evidence they've actually dug up at Tel Shiqmona, it's pretty compelling stuff. We're talking about actual vats, big clay basins, still stained purple.
Stained to purple.
And some of these things could hold up to 350 liters.
Whoa, okay. 350 liters. Let's picture that. A standard bathtub maybe holds 150, 200 liters.
Right. So these are significantly larger.
Yeah, these weren't small batch artisanal operations then. This was serious volume.
Definitely gets that across.
And besides these huge vats, what else? What other clues did they find there?
Well, the team identified in total 176 artifacts they could directly link to making the dye.
176.
Okay. Yeah, so that includes the vats, obviously, but also various tools, maybe other kinds of containers, things used in the process.
And we know what they were using to get this amazing color, right? It wasn't exactly crushed flowers or berries.
Yeah, no. Something a bit more marine.
Go on.
It came from mucus, secreted by specific types of sea snails from the Myricidae family.
Snail mucus, got it.
And what's really wild is that this mucus, it actually starts out kind of greenish or yellowish, but then almost like magic when you expose it to air, bam, it turns into that famous deep purple.
Wow. Talk about a bizarre chemical reaction. So they're collecting snails, getting this greenish goo out.
Carefully, presumably.
Right, carefully. And then through air exposure, maybe some other steps, it becomes this super valuable dye. And the science confirms this. They check the stains.
They did. They used a technique called HPLC, that's high-performance liquid chromatography. It lets them analyze the chemical signature. And yeah, the analysis confirmed the purple pigment was definitely from Myricidae sea snails.
Okay.
And they could even narrow it down further. The most common species they found traces of was Hexaplex trunculus.
Hexaplex trunculus. They actually ID'd the specific snail. That's like ancient CSI.
Pretty much. It's amazing what they can tell now.
So these big vats, were they just Like standard issue clay pots you'd find anywhere back then?
Not quite. They did more analysis, petrographic and FTIR analysis, basically looking closely at the clay minerals and how light interacts with the material.
Okay, what did that show?
It showed these specialized vats were likely made locally, right there on the Carmel coast, using local clays.
Makes sense.
But interestingly, they seem to have been fired at pretty low temperatures, maybe around 500 to 600 degrees Celsius.
Huh. That is interesting. You'd think for something holding liquids, potentially corrosive stuff, for a long time, you'd want it fired hotter, make it tougher.
You might think so, yeah. Normally, pottery for long-term use back then might be fired higher.
So what does that low-temp firing tell us? Anything about their process? Or the materials they had easy access to?
It's a fascinating little detail. The researchers suggest maybe the easy access to the right clay, or perhaps the specific way they formed these huge vats, made lower firing work okay.
Or maybe it points to just a really well-established local tradition. Vat making tailored specifically for this industry, lasting centuries.
That's definitely a possibility, too. It speaks to the longevity.
And speaking of longevity, this wasn't some short-lived fad industry. We're talking continuous production, 1100 to 600 BCE. That's a massive chunk of the Iron Age.
It really is, a significant stretch. And the evidence suggests it wasn't just steady, it actually scaled up quite a bit at one point.
Oh yeah? When was that?
Seems like around the 9th century BCE, production really took off, became even larger scale.
Okay, 9th century. What's happening then?
Well, that period lines up with growth in the Kingdom of Israel. And later, even when the Assyrians were dominant, it looks like the dye production kept going strong, maybe even expanded more.
Interesting. What do you think drove that increase? More demand from elites? Trade expanding?
Could be a mix of factors, more powerful rulers wanting to show off their status, maybe broader trade networks needing more luxury goods. It's hard to pin down perfectly.
Sure. And we're getting a clearer picture of the vats themselves now. You said 350 liters. They weren't exactly portable, were they?
Oh, definitely not. Based on the fragments found, the team reconstructed them as, large, very heavy vessels.
How big are we talking, roughly?
I think the opening at the top was maybe around 70 centimeters across.
Okay.
And they estimate a maximum diameter, and probably height, too, of about 90 centimeters. So substantial things.
And they probably weren't just sitting on the floor, right?
No, the thinking is they were likely sunk partially into the ground, for stability, mainly. Imagine wrestling with 350 liters of liquid otherwise.
Right, so you'd have these big, heavy, partly buried containers as like the main feature of the workshop.
Exactly. That seems to be the picture.
And it sounds like the actual dyeing. Probably wool, I guess.
Most likely wool, yeah. That was the primary textile.
That probably happened right there, in those same massive vats. Not like they souped the dye out and took it somewhere else.
That seems to be the most logical conclusion, yeah. Think about it moving a vat that heavy when it's full. Super difficult, super risky.
You'd lose valuable dye, too.
Precisely. So the researchers believe the whole process, from, dealing with the snail goo to getting the dyed fibers out, probably happened all in those big vats.
Okay, but that challenges something, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because I always imagine processing thousands of sea snails. That must have created an absolutely rank smell.
Oh, you'd think so. Based on what we know about shellfish decomposition, yeah. A powerful odor seems inevitable.
So you'd expect them to set up shop way outside of town, right? Downwind.
That's been the common assumption, sure. But the Tel Shiqmona, these vats are concentrated within what look like actual buildings, specific structures.
Inside? Really?
Seems so, suggesting it was a specialized production center, maybe not a standard residential zone, but still within defined buildings.
So maybe the smell? They just dealt with it, part of the job. Or maybe the scale required it to be more organized indoors?
Could be. Maybe the sheer economic importance outweighed the smell factor. Or perhaps they had techniques we don't know about to manage it, or the coastal winds helped. It definitely makes you rethink the setup.
Location, 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 though. That must have been absolutely key. Not just any beach would do.
Oh, absolutely crucial. The researchers really stress this link between the right marine environment and the success of these sites.
What's the right environment?
You need those rocky, sort of wave-cut platforms near the shore, abrasion platforms. That's the ideal habitat for these Myricidae snails.
Ah, okay, so the snails needed specific real estate.
Pretty much. And Shimona's coastline clearly had that prime habitat. It provided the raw materials right there. Apparently, even today, divers find a lot of these snails in that area.
Wow, so the geology and the sea life basically dictated where this super valuable industry could even exist.
It seems like a major factor for its long-term success there.
And it wasn't just Shiqmona using these big vats back in the Iron Age, was it? This type of setup.
No, that's another important point in the research. Similar large vats matching this type have turned up at other Iron Age coastal sites in the Levant.
Like where?
Places like Dor, Tel Kabri, Sarepta over in Lebanon, Tel El Barak.
Okay.
So it suggests that using this kind of large, maybe standardized vat was a more widespread regional practice, at least when it came to larger scale purple dye production, not just a Shiqmona thing.
Right. Okay, so let's recap this for everyone listening, pulling it all together. Tel Shiqmona, this is now the first place identified that shows us a continuous series of Iron Age purple dye workshops. Real proof of large-scale, sustained production for, what, 500 years?
Roughly, yeah. That long haul from about 1100 to 600 BCE.
And we've got the physical evidence, those purple stained vats, hundreds of other related artifacts, clear industrial activity.
Tangible proof.
We know the secret ingredient was mucus from sea snails, mainly that Hexaplex trunculus, thanks to the chemical analysis.
Yep, snail power.
These specialized clay vats, made locally on the Carmel coast, fired at surprisingly low temps. And this industry just kept chugging along, really ramping up in the 9th century BCE.
Thrived for centuries.
We even have a picture of the vats, massive, 350 liters, probably sunk in the ground, about 90 centimeters wide and tall.
Big installations.
And it looks like both making the dye and dyeing the wool happened right there in the same container.
All in one pot, basically.
Plus, finding them inside buildings challenges the whole stinky industry must be outside idea, suggesting specialized production hubs.
Right, a dedicated center.
And the location depended heavily on having the right coastal environment for the snails. And similar vats elsewhere point to a regional method.
That sums it up nicely.
It really gives you, listening, a sense of the sheer industrial scale of this ancient craft, doesn't it?
It truly does. This detailed picture from Tel Shiqmona, it offers you a much richer way to understand ancient economies, complex trade networks, and just how important something seemingly small like dye color could be. It highlights how these, niche industries could actually operate on a really significant scale and have a lasting impact.
And that brings us to a final thought, something for you to chew on after this. Think about this incredibly intense, centuries-long production at Shiqmona. It was completely tied to one specific natural resource, right? These snails.
Absolutely dependent on them.
Doesn't that echo patterns we still see today?
Yeah.
Resource exploitation, specialization based on what's available locally.
It really does resonate with modern issues, yeah.
So what other maybe niche industries from the past might have similar surprising stories? Stories of unexpected scale, long-term impact, maybe complex infrastructure that are just waiting for us to uncover.
Good question. What else is hiding in plain sight?
Exactly. We want to encourage you to think about those often unseen systems and structures that supported both the luxuries, like purple dye, and maybe even the necessities of ancient societies. You might be amazed at the scale and the ingenuity you find when you start looking just a little bit deeper.